Thank you very much, Excellency Annette Wellman-Mouse. Maria has just spoken. Dr. Sipho Moyo, members of the German government, esteemed members of the and family of the One campaign, and all of us here. I see Binta is here already. Oh, I see Hilda is also joined us, and many others. So a very warm welcome. But it's not for me to welcome you. It's just to greet you. And good evening. It's really great to be here in a room where we have like-minded people and maybe same spirit on the issue of empowering women and girls in many areas. Of course, this is taking place in the margins of the forum that is hosted by the Chancellor, and we are very grateful for that. And let me just commend the organizers of tonight's event, not only for tonight, but for the tireless work and campaign and advocacy which civil society organizations such as yours and millions of grassroots activists across the world do to ensure that we indeed make poverty history. As Nelson Mandela so eloquently reminded us, and I'd like to quote him, he said, "Overcoming poverty is not a task of charity. It is an act of justice. Like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural. It is man-made, and it can be overcome and eradicated by the actions of human beings." Close quotes. And of course, an equally eminent African and Pan-Africanist, Samora Machel, also reminded us that women's emancipation is not an act of charity either. It is a precondition for the transformation of society. So if we want to transform society to be just, free, and equitable, we cannot but ensure that we emancipate women from all the ills that have been spoken about tonight. But of course, as you eloquently said, we are all waiting for the post-2015 development agenda. And this year is very historic, and we really need to take it and do things differently. It's historic, it's 20 years since Beijing. I was very much young looking when I led the South African delegation to Beijing 20 years ago. And of course, this year in Africa is the year of women's empowerment for the realization of Agenda 2063. And I was happy you mentioned the issue of violence against women and girls, because at our summit, we emphasized that. We even got Angelina Jolie, who's the UN rep, to come and be with us, even though they concentrate more on violence in conflict. But we say that what happens in conflict is just the extreme of what happens in society. So you cannot deal with just what happens in conflict. It has to be contextualized within what happens in society every day, and you've eloquently mentioned that. Of course, we decided to have a common Pan-African agenda for development, which we call Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, and has a lot of priorities, amongst which is agriculture, which women are very much involved in, agro-processing, infrastructure development, industrialization, African skills revolution. But we know that the pace of transformation of our continent will be slow, if not incomplete, if we do not ensure that women are part of driving that development. And of course, we also want to emphasize education, because education, we believe that to some extent is a great equalizer. If you want to take people out of the vicious cycle of poverty, education is the quickest way of doing it. And ladies and gentlemen, I completely agree with your campaign that poverty is sexist. And this campaign is an important initiative because indeed, women bear a disproportionate degree of poverty in every society in the world. And feminization of poverty in our world exists today, despite over 100 years since the first women in New Zealand cast their vote. And today, despite all that, in the majority of countries, women still earn for the same job 10 to 30% less than men. But at the same time, women spend 70% of their income for their family and household, whereas men only spend 30%. So it should be the other way. More women should get more money because they spend more of it on families. And again, when I say this, I get the same reaction of discomfort. I can say. But at our summit, I was sitting in the podium when these statistics were being mentioned, and I said to President Zuma, was sitting next to me, and I said, "What do you do with your money?" And that's what we should ask. But more importantly, we should empower women so that we know that families and communities will be taken care of.
What did you say?
He said, it's the others. Me, I use all my money on which obviously every man will want to say that. But anyway, we also know that women remain in poverty because of the lack of social services, childcare, public health care, and facilities to look after the aged and disabled. And all this work falls on the shoulders of women, unpaid, unrecognized, but they still do it, and therefore have less time to spend on productive work that will allow them to earn some income. But we also know that women remain still poor because they have less access to economic power, to capital, even seats on the boardrooms, management and professions, and they have less productive assets like land, capital, technology. But of course, we also know that women constitute the majority. So if the majority are poor, then obviously we have to concentrate on the majority who are poor, who are women, if we are to deal with poverty in earnest. But of course, daily, in Africa, but also in many developing countries, women still have to spend time looking for water. All of us here probably have more taps in the house than the people, but for many women in the developing world, there isn't a tap in their house. they have to go and look for water elsewhere, spending time, energy. They have to go and look for firewood. And so when we talk about energy, it's not just for sure, it's for economic development, but also it's to free women and girls from these shores so that they can study and they can also do productive work. So the provision of water, clean water, energy for households is part of empowering women. And of course, also in parliaments, we see less women, and yet that's where decisions are made about whether you will have water in the house or not, whether you'll have energy provided in your house or not, whether your kids can go to school or not. So women have to be there, not only because it's their right, but also because they will bring those issues onto the table about children, about what happens in the household, about food for children. So it's critically important that we look at that. Of course, as mentioned, 39,000 girls worldwide become brides before they are 18. And so we have started a campaign against child marriages. More than 800 women die every day from complications of pregnancy, which really is an indictment on all of us. Pregnancy is about the continuation of a human race. That's the most important thing about making sure that humans don't get extinct. If women don't get pregnant, the human race will be extinct. But how much do we invest on that? We don't. It's the most important national service. But how do we empower women? We don't in many countries. And of course, in those countries, you find that they do not have the 23 physicians and nurses and midwives per 10,000 people deemed necessary to deliver essential health services. And of course, in Africa, women produce more than 80% of the food that's eaten there. But they only own around 1% of productive land due to traditional practices and inheritance laws, which we are fighting to change. And I'm happy that there are some countries which are now addressing those, but very few, very slowly. Ethiopia is one of them, where that's where my home is for now, that has really looked into giving women land rights, which they should have. And of course, all these are, as President Mandela said, they are all man-made policies. They can all be changed. And when I say man-made, I actually literally mean man-made, not human-made. And I think you are right that we should invite men to join us, progressive men, to join us in this fight to change this situation. And of course, I think we need to do these things, more of them, but better, faster, so that indeed we can end this poverty, which is very sexist. So I'd like to salute your courage, and I hope that more people will join your important campaign. But I want to take an issue with this campaign. just one issue. I cannot look an African woman in the eye and say it's okay for you to be poor as long as you are not extremely so. I cannot. So this issue of fighting extreme poverty, I disagree with completely. We must fight poverty. How do I say, and how do we go to those women who are enduring all the things we've mentioned and say to them, continue enduring them as long as you are not extremely. I know the World Bank says that, but one shouldn't be saying that. We should be different. So that's my view. And as you know, I express my views. So the African Union, of course, having highlighted these issues particularly during this year, which is the year of women empowerment, we would like to work with all of you to give women better technology who are working in the fields, who are working in agriculture. We have decided that we are going to work very hard in the next 10 years to relegate the handheld hoe to the museum, to give women better technology, but also to ensure that they are included in finance by engaging with financial institutions, ministers of finance and many others to ensure that women have access to capital. It's very ironic that everybody tells us that women repay their debts better than men. But when they ask for loans, it's very difficult. Why? Again, it's man-made. So we have to really change that. But women have the right, and it's essential for society that they be represented in government, in the judiciary, in the security services, because part of the problem with this violence against women is that when women try to report it, domestic violence, they tell us that they go to the police station, they find men who say, "What did you do?" As though there's something that justifies. What did you do? Or were you wearing a short dress? Or is that why you were raped? So I think women need to be there, but we also need to train the men who are there to also ensure that women, when they get there, they get protected and not dehumanized and their dignity further undermined. Women have to be in academia, but women have to be in all areas of human endeavor if this world is to be just. And so we are also trying to ensure that women, as Africa tries to industrialize, that women organize themselves, and as the world is looking at the blue economy, that women participate in the green economies, in infrastructure, in manufacturing, in knowledge. And of course, underpinning this, again, should be investment in girls. And also, as women, as mothers, do we empower girls when they are young at home? How many of us just sit quietly when a brother says to a sister, "Make me a cup of tea"? Why? Why should, if he feels like a cup of tea, he must stand up and make himself a cup of tea. And ask the others if they want tea also. But sometimes you see a mother just keeping quiet, and the poor young girl will stand up, make this cup of tea. How many of us sometimes turn a blind eye when a brother beats up a sister? Young children bring back to society as adults what we gave them as children. So if we allow young boys to bully women and their sisters and their cousins and their friends, why are we surprised when they come back as adults and do the same to us? So we also have a responsibility to socialize our children properly. Equality must start at home, at school, and then it will happen in society in general. That's also one of my views, that we have to. But of course, I'm also very appreciative of the initiative of the Chancellor, who's trying to set targets for G7 to increase the number of vocationally and technically trained girls and women in developing countries, because education is a great equalizer, and I think we should support that. And of course, we have introduced a scorecard because we want to monitor what happens, a gender scorecard which we introduced at our summit, to monitor the progress, so that those who are doing well can share views with those who are not doing well, how they are managing. And those who are not doing well can see it's possible, because they will be seeing what's happening in their peers. But of course, we also see the tragedy of the migrants and refugees, probably the biggest since the Second World War. And of course, it comes from desperation. Migration is as old as mankind, and it will continue. But it should be out of choice, not out of desperation. And so we have to create a more inclusive, just world for every man, woman, and child with whom we share this planet. It should not matter that they are not German, they are not South African, they are not Ethiopian. As long as they are human beings on this planet, it must demean us when we see the plight that they are going through. And of course, we also appreciate the stance that Chancellor Merkel has taken on this issue, because we have to respect diversity, race, gender, culture, religion, language, and build tolerant societies, inclusive societies, and leadership that embraces diversity as a strength rather than a threat. And of course, for Africa, we are trying to build a prosperous, integrated, peaceful, people-centered continent, but it will be very slow, if not impossible, without women driving it. Thank you.